Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Prodigal Return by Jean Reinhardt, narrated by Michael Healy. We had to celebrate and rejoice, for your brother was dead but has come to life. He was lost and has been found. Luke, chapter 15, verse 32. Chapter 1. Tom Gallagher had never seen his mother, Catherine, walk so fast, and in spite of his long legs he was finding it difficult to keep up with her. Lily, his uncle's wife, linked his arm and did her best to match his step, but she was shorter than the 16-year-old and ended up half walking, half running to keep pace with him. "Eyes ahead, Tom. Never mind what's being said on either side of the street." Lily was panting as she spoke. She needn't have worried. The basket hanging from his mother's arm had Tom's full attention. He tried to focus on how the rhythm of her step controlled the movement of its swing, but it was impossible to block out the laughter of the women behind them. The young teenager knew full well what sort of business they were in, which was why the three of them were hurrying through the street as if a pack of wolves snapped at their heels. "Not too far now, Tom. Don't you be listening to what those hussies are shouting at you. And not a word of this to your da or your uncle, hear?" "Yes, Ma, I hear you. But what are we doing in this part of the city?" His question went unanswered. They rounded a corner into an alley so narrow, had they stretched out their arms, their knuckles would have scraped off the grime-covered walls on either side. Catherine stopped at the first house in a terraced row and stepped through its entrance, the door long since gone to fuel someone's fire. Lily pushed Thomas ahead of her and took a quick look up and down the alley before following him into the grubby, dark hallway. Knocking on the first door she saw, Catherine hoped they would not have to venture up the littered stairway. A young, ragged child, his mouth crusted in sores, opened the door, and Catherine inquired about a Mrs. Bridie McGrain. Eyeing the basket on her arm, the boy offered to show them the way. "Well, thank you kindly, son. Lead on." Catherine stood aside to let him pass. Tom felt bile rise in his throat at the stench of the place and swallowed hard, determined not to retch in front of anyone. He marvelled at the way his mother and Lily could just as easily have been walking through a park by the way they carried themselves. Not once did he see them raise a hand to their nose, as he himself was eventually forced to do. "Is your ma at home, love?" Catherine asked the young boy as he led them to the end of the hallway towards the back of the house. "She's dead, missus." "Where's your father?" asked Tom. "And who wants to know?" came a defensive reply. "It's all right, son. We're only here to see an old friend fallen on hard times. Nobody's looking for your da," Catherine assured the boy who had stopped in his tracks. "That door down yonder is Mrs. McGrain's, the last one with the wailing of a baby coming out of it." He pointed to an even narrower, darker corridor than the one they had just walked through. Catherine dipped her hand under the blue-checked cover in her basket to pull out a loaf of bread. "Good lad. Here's a little something for your trouble." "Thanks, missus." The boy's eyes lit up as he snatched the food before running back up the hallway. Tom noticed the difference in the level of the floor and worried the house might be sloping to one side. "I fear this building is about to fall in on top of us," he whispered to Lily from behind. "We'll be grand, Tom. This part of the house was probably added onto the back to fit more people in. Be thankful she's not in the basement with the pigs. In the cold weather there's nothing like sleeping next to a nice fat sow to keep a body warm." Tom could not see Lily's face to discern whether or not she was being serious, but the tone of her voice was enough to tell him so. He had a feeling she may have been speaking from experience. A very weak beam of daylight filtered into the narrow corridor behind them, but it was enough to show up the filth and grime, the source of a very rancid odour. When they reached the last door, Catherine knocked and stood back. The door creaked open to reveal a young girl, not more than 8 years old, rocking a crying baby in her arms. Catherine looked over a head of matted brown hair to where 3 younger children huddled together on an old, badly stained mattress. "Is Mrs. McGrain here with ye, love?" she asked softly. The girl nodded her head and pointed to her left. Catherine gave a quick glance at Lily and Tom before stepping into a room as grim and depressing as the rest of the building. In a dark corner lay a heap of rags, partly covered by an old, torn blanket. As she bent low over the figure, it was hard to tell if the woman was breathing or not. "Bridie? Bridie, love, do you remember me? You would have known me as Catherine McGrother." The woman's eyelids flickered at the sound of a familiar name from her past. "You remember me from our school days in Ireland, don't you? I used to sit behind you, Bridie. You were a mighty singer back then." Catherine knelt down on the dusty earthen floor by the sick woman's side. "I can see you've fallen on hard times, Bridie. My parents were very sorry to hear about your mother not surviving the crossing on the boat. It must have been a terrible blow to you, arriving in a strange land at such a tender age, and no family to look out for you." "I was a bit of a wild, wee thing, Catherine, and spent most of my time hiding from women who wanted to put me in a foundling home, or, God forbid, send me out west on a train with other unfortunate orphans." "They meant well, Bridie," said Catherine. "You might have lived on a farm, with decent food and fresh air. Surely that's better than sleeping in sewer pipes." The response was so low, Catherine had to lean close to hear what was said. Lily put a hand on her sister-in-law's shoulder to draw her back, with a warning to be careful of catching the fever. "Here, Bridie, let me help you sit up so you can have a wee sup of this water." Catherine ignored Lily's advice. "It's grand and clean. I brought it with me, and a basket of food. I'll leave that here with your children." "Them's not mine," came a weak reply. "The baby is. He's all I've got left. I lost my man and our 2 boys when our building caught fire last year. God have mercy on their poor souls." A rasping cough shook the ragged bundle, and it was a couple of minutes before the woman could go on. "I didn't know I was carrying Jeremiah at the time, but it lifted my spirit when I found out. He's a good baby, and I managed to earn enough money to keep us, up until a month ago." They were interrupted by the sound of a man's voice shouting in the corridor. The speed at which the door burst open caused a cloud of fine dust to fill the room, and Tom stepped in front of his mother and Lily. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a furious scowl on his face grabbed hold of the boy's lapels and pushed him aside. "Get out, you bunch of no-good do-gooders! Leave us alone! We're not causing any harm to anyone!" he roared. As Catherine stood to speak, her son put a hand on the man's chest and was struck squarely on the chin by a fist as hard as a rock. Staggering backwards, Tom was about to land on top of Bridie when Lily caught him by the arm. Catherine was by his side in a second and placed herself in front of her son. "No, Francis, it's all right. I know this woman. We went to school together in Ireland." Bridie's effort in shouting out caused another bout of harsh coughing. Examining the mark from the blow on Tom's face, Catherine explained that she had come to see Bridie, having heard that she was ill. Pointing to the basket of food being held by one of the children, she told him they were welcome to share it. "We don't need no charity, ma'am. Bridie could do with the nourishment, though." The man handed the baby to Lily and gathered his children together. I'll take them out for some fresh air and leave you to your visit. I'd prefer it if you were not here on my return, if you don't mind." As he brushed past Tom, he muttered a quick apology, and when the last child had shut the door behind her, the basket could be seen standing in the middle of the floor, still full of food. The baby had begun to whimper, and Lily rocked him gently. As Bridie held out her arms to take him, Tom walked away to steal a glance through the slits in the rough wooden planks that had been nailed across the unglazed window. He knew the baby was about to be suckled and had turned away, more to save his own embarrassment than give the mother privacy. "How did you find me, Bridie, to send that message?" asked Catherine. "I was begging in the street and saw you pass by with your daughter. It was she that caught my eye. There was something very familiar about her. Sure isn't she the spit of you?" Bridie never took her eyes from her baby as he suckled. "But it was when you spoke to her and I heard your accent that I knew who you were. I followed you home. Did you not see me behind you?" "No, I can't say as I did. I was most likely hurrying back for something or other. That would have been our Ellen you saw with me. She's the image of me, all right. Even I can see it." Catherine smiled and offered some more water. "Who's the man with those children, Bridie? Are you his woman now?" "Not at all. Molly, his eldest girl, minds the younger ones while we go out to look for work. There's 3 families living in this room. Francis lost his wife while she was carrying her last child. Both of them died. Rest their poor souls. He is afraid his children will be taken away if they're found on their own. I think he's been secretly pleased about me ailing, so that I have to stay here with them." "Is there no one in the 3rd family sharing with ye that can mind the children?" asked Lily. Bridie shook her head. "They're a young couple, not long over from Belfast. I doubt they'll be here for too long, seeing as they both have regular work now. Sure, I can't blame them for leaving. Best they get out before any babies come along." "Can I do anything for you, Bridie? I have a little money saved." "That's mighty kind of you, Catherine, but I fear I've not long left. There's only one thing I ask, and I'll die happy if you can find it in your heart to do it." "What is it, Bridie? Do you want us to take you to a doctor?" "No, I saw one a while back. He wasn't very hopeful either." Bridie looked straight into Catherine's eyes. "Will you take my son and raise him as your own? Today, if you can, before I change my mind?" There was an awkward silence until Lily stepped forward. "I will, if you'll let me, Bridie. I'm wed to Catherine's brother, Thomas. I can't have any children of my own, but I would dearly love to care for your son." It was blurted out impulsively, but Lily meant every word. "Wee Thomas McGrother, the teacher's pet, with all his fancy poems. I remember him well. If you promise to do right by my child, I'll be happy to hand him over to your care," Bridie wheezed. "We'll have none of that talk, do you hear me?" Catherine took her son by the arm. "Myself and Tom are going out to find a barrow, and we'll bring you to the infirmary right this minute." Before anyone had a chance to protest, Catherine grabbed Tom by the wrist and pulled him into the corridor. Both mother and son were silent as they made their way outside and further down the alleyway, until they came to a couple of men sitting on a doorstep. "Would you know of a barrow we could use for a few hours?" asked Catherine. She explained why it was needed and offered to pay for its use. "I have one, missus, but I'll push it myself if you don't mind. That way I'll be sure of getting it back." Tom, taking offence at what was being implied, protested that they were not thieves, but his mother silenced him with a look. She thanked the man and turned to walk back to Bridie, linking her son's arm as they went. "Come along, Tom. He knows where to find us. Let's get this poor woman and her baby away from that filthy hovel she's been living in." Chapter 2. "It kills me to see you hand over another sixpence, James." Mary smacked her husband lightly on the back of the head. "Stop leaving that donkey at the side of the road while you're in Paddy Mac's, do you hear me?" Their son Jamie gulped down the rest of his tea and took his good jacket from a hook by the door. He looked very neat, with a freshly trimmed beard. "You're in a mighty rush to get to Mass, aren't you? Are you sure that's where you're headed now, Jamie?" teased his father. Mary shot her son a scornful look and received a peck on the cheek in reply. "I'm not staying here to listen to the pair of ye squabbling over the latest fines at petty sessions. If you and the rest of your cronies would stay with your animals while they grazed along the ditches, ye wouldn't be handing over so many sixpences now, would ye?" The couple smiled at one another as they listened to their son good-naturedly reprimand his father on his way out of the house. "He's right, though, James. You could at least stay with the ass while he's grazing, couldn't you?" chided Mary as soon as they were alone. "What? And sit looking at him? I suppose I could always bring a bit of mending with me to keep me busy. Sure, wouldn't the hotel love to see me on the side of the road with its fine linen draped across the ditch while I stitch it?" James laughed at the thought of it. At every petty sessions hearing, a handful of men and women from the parish would be summoned to pay fines for allowing their donkeys to graze unattended on the grassy verges of the public highway. This was known as grazing the long acre, and cows and goats could be found doing likewise. "I suppose it's cheaper than renting a field for the poor old donkey. Go on now, James, and get ready for Mass. I think we should leave a bit earlier than usual this morning and catch our Jamie with that girl he's sweet on. Maggie has her informers keeping an eye on him," said Mary. "Maggie is late rising this morning. Is she having another day in bed, then? I hope she's not ailing. It's not like her to stay away from Mass. You know how much she looks forward to the bit of gossip." "I did call her, but she gave out to me for waking her and pulled the quilt up over her head," said Mary. "Speaking of gossip, did I tell you that Petey Halpin's cousin over in Liverpool is wed to one of our grandnieces?" said James. "Well, now, your sister was told about that on Friday, but we didn't mention it to you." "It's best not to talk about such behaviour," replied Mary in a smug tone. "I should have known Maggie would have the news got already. I suppose the girl is with child, and that's what all the hurry was about," said James. He was thinking about his own daughter, Catherine, who married her unsuspecting husband, Patrick, never telling him she was carrying another man's child, a man who had forced himself upon her. James was glad that his wife and sister had never been told that secret. Poor Owen and Rose would turn in their graves if they knew that one of their grandchildren was such a hussy. That girl was always overly friendly with men. If you ask me, she may not even know who the father of the unfortunate child is," said Mary. "Have a bit of charity, woman. You're about to kneel in prayer up in the church. At least she's wed now. That'll put a halt to her gallop. And that young man is to be commended for doing the decent thing." "More fool is he. But at least the innocent wee mite will have a father to put a roof over their heads and food on the table." A wistful look came over Mary's face. "James, I have a sudden longing to write a letter to our Mary Ann. Can we do it this afternoon? We haven't heard a word from her this long time." Chapter 3. "How do I stop it crying? The neighbours will be knocking on the door any minute now. Have you prepared that bottle yet?" Lily turned and smiled at the sight of her husband pacing across the room, rocking a very hungry baby in his arms. "Here you are, and he's a boy, not an it, and a very loud one at that." Thomas sat on a chair by the window, allowing the early morning sun wash over them. He was amazed at how quickly the milk was disappearing into the tiny, gulping mouth. As she folded some bed linen, Lily smiled at the grunts and gasps of satisfaction coming from the little bundle in her husband's arms. "I've never seen a baby put weight on so quickly. It's thanks to the good milk we've been giving him." His poor mother had barely anything in her breast, but I dare say what she had was better than the filthy, watery liquid he would have received otherwise," said Lily. "How can such a tiny infant swallow at this speed? I hope that's not a sign he'll be fond of the drink when older," laughed Thomas. "Don't even think such a thing. You will have to set a good example for him. He's your son now." "Are you not happy to have a child of your own to rear, Thomas?" The anxious look on his wife's face told him Lily was just as nervous about the prospect of raising a child as he was. "You, of all people, have no need to ask such a question of me, with my own daughter still in Ireland, refusing to leave her grandparents." Thomas looked down at the sleeping baby in his arms. "It will take me a bit of time to feel like a father to this wee mite, but I'll admit he has already found a place in my heart." Thomas had tried on numerous occasions over the years to bring Eliza to America, having left her as a young baby in his parents' care after the death of her mother. Losing his wife at such a young age had been unbearable for Thomas, so when the offer of work on a newspaper in New York came up, he saw it as a fresh start. At first, Eliza was to remain in Ireland until Thomas had settled into his new life, but as the years went by, he could see on each of his visits that it would be wrong to separate his daughter from her grandparents. "Eliza is a young woman now, my love. I could see in her eyes how much she enjoyed her last trip over. Do you recall how she spoke of her childhood friends who have come to live here? I dare say it won't be too long before we have her join us, Thomas. But in the meantime this young fellow will keep us from idleness. Is that not so, Jeremiah?" Lily kissed the sleeping baby's head and carefully took him from her husband's arms. Thomas looked at the expression of maternal love on his wife's face and knew that she had done the right thing in bringing into their home a young baby sorely in need of caring guardians. He could see that Lily was already a mother to her newly adopted son, and was sure that he, himself, would soon begin to think of the young child as his own flesh and blood. The apartment they had recently moved to was in a good area and had 2 large bedrooms, plenty of space to accommodate an extra family member. Thomas knew that as long as his mother was alive, his daughter would remain in Ireland. She had more or less told him so on her last visit to New York. In spite of that, Thomas wished his mother a long and healthy life. He had plenty to fill his time while he waited, especially with a baby to take care of and provide for. "Lily, I've been meaning to discuss something with you, and I think now might be as good a time as any," Thomas whispered. "There's no need to speak so softly, my love. Jeremiah will remain asleep once his belly is full. What is it? You have such a frown upon your face, I'm not sure I want to hear what you have to say." "There was more in that letter from home than I shared with you at the time, Lily. I cannot divulge the content just yet, but Mr. McIntyre feels it worth investigating." Thomas was speaking of his employer. "He feels that an Irishman will have a much better chance of becoming privy to information not easily acquired. I would receive a fine commission to add to our savings, Lily, and with our new addition to the family, the money would be very welcome. Do you not agree?" "Oh, Thomas, The last time you accepted an assignment like that, you were away for such a long time, and you put your life in danger. Must you do the same again? Don't fret so, Lily. There will be some element of risk, but you know how careful I am. Thomas turned his back to his wife and looked down 2 floors onto the street below. And yes, I will have to travel quite a distance for this particular assignment. I really cannot say too much about it for now, but a young man I know from the past may have gotten himself into a bit of trouble. As Lily kept her eyes on the broad back of the man who meant everything to her, mixed emotions prevented her from speaking. She knew that if she begged him not to go, Thomas would abide by her wishes, but it would hang between them, and there would come a day when he would resent the restrictions put upon him. Lily had made a vow to herself never to hold her husband back from the work he loved most, fighting injustice and exposing corruption. How long might you be gone, Thomas? I cannot say for sure, love, but I promise I shall not stay away a minute longer than is necessary. Thomas left his place by the window and pulled a chair up in front of the one his wife was now seated upon. You must promise that you will not be overly anxious about me whilst I am away. He took both her hands in his. Can you do that, love? As she looked him straight in the eye, Lily smiled warmly and nodded. Of course I can promise that, Thomas. Sure, I'll have a young baby to keep me busy. I may not even notice your absence. Thomas laughed and wrapped his arms snugly around Lily's shoulders. He knew that she was putting on a brave face to reassure him, and that she would worry every night before falling asleep until his return, and he loved her all the more for her pretense. Chapter 4. As the 8-year-old boy scrutinized the horizon, he seemed unaware of a hand lightly stroking his raven-black hair. This was something he would normally shrug off indignantly, embarrassed by the public show of affection. "Why, if it isn't Mary Ann McGrother!" a female voice called out. "What brings you back to Ireland? I hope none of the family are poorly." The boy spun quickly around at the mention of a familiar name and moved closer to Mary Ann, who was struggling to remember the name of the middle-aged woman beaming at her. "Oh, it's yourself, Mrs. Murphy. I'm sorry it took me so long to recognize you, but it's been a long time since I was last home. Nobody is sick, thank goodness." Mary Ann shot a glance at the boy, but he had turned once more to watch out for the first sign of land. The woman chuckled. "I haven't been back myself for almost 3 years. My youngest girl still lives in Blackrock. She got wed to one of the Breens. He's a fisherman, of course, as are most of the men in the village. Do you remember how your brother-in-law fished our boat for us after I lost my 2 boys, rest their poor souls? A good-hearted man is Patrick Gallagher, no doubt about it." A wistful look came over the woman's face. "Well, I gave that boat to my daughter as a wedding present, and they moved into my old wreck of a house. I was happy to leave Blackrock. Too many sad memories there for me." "So you live in England now, Mrs. Murphy?" "In Manchester, love. It's a grand place. My eldest daughter wed an Englishman, a grocer with his own shop, no less." Mrs. Murphy leaned in close to whisper. "A Protestant, mind you, but he's not very pious, and the children are all Catholic, thanks be to God." "How many grandchildren do you have altogether?" Mary Ann tried to keep the conversation away from her own circumstances. 3 in Manchester that I live with, above the grocer's. I look after them while their mother helps her husband with the shop. My 5th grandchild is expected any day now. That's why I'm on my way over, to be with my youngest when the time comes for her 2nd baby to arrive. I was with her when she had the first one. A girl wants her mother by her side at a time like that.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?